But thank you all so much for joining us for Job Search Help, the truth about hiring systems. And today's presentation is led by Kelli Hrivnak, the founder of Knak Digital, a boutique recruitment firm that specializes in identifying and matching technology, digital marketing, and creative talent with hyper-growth businesses. Kelli is a leader with over 15 years of experience in staffing and recruiting services. Throughout her career, she has partnered with a large variety of companies, from Fortune 500 corporations to startups. Her extensive background in the technology and marketing industry in particular has provided her with valuable insights she looks forward to sharing with job seekers. And again, I want to thank the Friends of the Library for all their support. So all 85 of us who are watching live and the many more that will watch the recording, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Kelli for joining us this morning. And Kelli, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Right. Robert, thank you so much for having me back. It's been a year or two, but hello, everyone. Thank you so much for spending an hour with me. I've got a lot of material to cover this morning, so I'm going to keep my eyes on the clock. I would love to keep some time open at the end for some Q&A. So I do know that there's an official Q&A that you can submit through Zoom. I'll also be looking in the chat and catching up with that at the end of the presentation as well. And I see, thank you for sharing your professional background. Just curious to hear who my audience is today. And actually, let me pop up my slide real quickly. So I'm coming from the Baltimore, Maryland area. See, we've got a lot of people out here on the East Coast. All right, let's see. Does this look good? Everybody can see.
Looks good.
Okay, fantastic. Well, let me get into everything first. And so today, really the basis of what we're going to be covering is going to be the truth about hiring systems. And so, as a recruiter who's very active in talking to job seekers on a day-to-day basis, I am hearing the same questions day in and day out. And so first, I guess let me share a little bit about who I am and my experiences to give you a little context as far as where I'm coming from, my advice, and just what I've seen over the years. Let's see. There we go. So real quickly, I've spent over 17 years in sourcing and recruitment, more specifically on the consulting side. So meaning I partner with different organizations, really have worked in a variety of different industries that can range from government, nonprofit, primarily small businesses, certainly have worked with many enterprise level partners as well, hospitality, CPG, healthcare, advertising, and of course, technology. And probably over the scope of my 17 years, have had the opportunity of working with over 50 different client companies and a lot of different personalities and hiring managers. So have seen it all, worked with some really fantastic people, and certainly have come across some more challenging bias and challenges just in general in the landscape. So I think a lot of my experiences will shape a little bit about how you can position yourself. And, I'm a big believer in kind of, overcoming any objections that you might have, kind of thinking as a salesperson itself. So we'll cover that as well. And then just, I, had given it some thought as far as during that scope of my career, I've probably read over 40,000 resumes, interviewed over thousands of applicants, and helped tons of people with interview prep and salary negotiation. So it's a little bit of what I do every day, and happy to share a little bit of what I've discovered over the years to you. Certainly, and to give you some context too, is my specialty is primarily partnering with businesses to scale their tech and marketing teams and a little bit of creative. I know that I've seen in the chat that everybody's coming from different professions. So again, my experience will be more specific to marketing and tech, but in general, I think a lot of these tactics and advice should be able to translate. So let's get into kind of the starter of the topic. And this is something, myths that we believe or myths that we hear. And, as a recruiter, as somebody who is very active and engaging, as I had said, with a lot of job seekers, is these are just, call them legacy ideas, things that have just been kind of passed throughout decade to decade that I continue to hear. And as much as I'm an advocate for trying to send the message that a lot of these don't exist, I do want to kind of reinforce and discuss each of these as well so we can kind of just get these out of the way and move forward as far as doing things that we can control. And I think the biggest one that we always hear is, and thinking about it too, is I understand why a lot of people believe that the ATSs, and for those of you who are not familiar with that term, applicant tracking system, it's really the software where if you're going online, if you're going to a company website, you're submitting your resume to the software platform that is essentially integrated as the software that will be managing all things hiring for that internal organization, but is essentially that process of putting you into the system itself. So you're parsing your resume into here, you're putting your information in. This is the applicant tracking system. And so a lot of people are believing that these systems are essentially analyzing your resume and making decisions based upon whether you're a fit or not. And I don't want to get too much in the weeds about the technicality of how these work, but I will say I've worked with Greenhouse and Ashby and JobVite and a lot of these different, as well as my own more individual system. And really the basis of these systems is humans go in and they configure how these systems will work. The only really, I think, technicality as far as what is going to be auto rejecting those resumes are something that is called a knockout question. And so, I've seen it happen where people will essentially go in, and maybe some of you have experienced this, where submit your resume and maybe within 15 seconds you do get an auto reject. Um, what happens is people will go in and set up a question. What is your work status? Do you have experience in? And these are typically yes and no questions, typically not open-ended, that are going to be important for that organization as far as being able to be qualified. So if you go in and answer something where you are not aligned, that will trigger that automatic, basically, rejection. Other than that, and I'll kind of get into this a little bit as we're talking about AI, because I know AI is everywhere from all different aspects. Um, Really, and thinking back to, as far as I remember, JobVite did have some systems or functionality in place where there were keyword matching. So, which I have my own opinions about that, but they would go in and kind of think what they believed due to the keyword as far as a strong resume and not so strong. And as we're moving forward, as there are systems and even, particular, I guess you could say, extensions where the AI capabilities are able to go in and also kind of analyze a resume and maybe suggest to the human, this person could be stronger. I personally, besides maybe some enterprise level organizations that have adopted, I believe there's Paradox is one, something that I read about and actually heard about at RecFest last year. I believe it was UPS, but don't quote me on that, was using an AI tool to do a lot of the chatbot hiring and process itself. The only example where I have seen this, where it is running that whole process through, is really for higher volume and low wage roles. I have not, to my knowledge, seen any company adopt any kind of AI system that they are trusting to manage that whole process. We are starting to see, obviously, a ton of different tools that are allowing for chatbots to come in and kind of initiate that initial screen. I think that still we're seeing a lot of companies determine if that's a great choice for candidate experience. Ethically, a lot of companies are deciding if that's right or not. So we're not quite there yet. A lot of people are testing. But just thinking again is, me as a recruiter, my job is to find the most qualified people to bring to my hiring partners. Whether, I find them directly and assess that, if I have some output from any type of system suggests that, a human recruiter is going to be analyzing that to make sure that there is technically a match to move over to the hiring manager for review, or frankly, we're not doing our job. So a lot of recruiters are very wary of trusting any technical system or tool to really do a lot of that sourcing. They will always be auditing that. All right, I think I covered that a little bit. I do want to move to a few other ones. I did cover the AI score determines who gets hired. There is, a lot of questions around should I use a Word document or a PDF document when I am submitting my resume into these ATS systems. Um, the systems that I've worked with, I have found that most are modern and able to aggregate all of that information and put it into fields. Typically, you should be able to, once it parses that information and puts it into a field, I've seen most where you are able to go in and make sure that those fields were properly aggregated as far as where your information aligned. The only thing that I have seen where there could potentially be some issues is if you have images or there's large text boxes where, and again, this is more of a parsing issue, if anything. So I would probably refrain from using some of those, kind of, I guess, fun text boxes and design or graphics because they could potentially just cause some issues with parsing. Um, Again, I don't see any huge differentiation between PDFs and Word documents. As I said, both should be able to parse correctly with most ATS systems. And also just kind of how I work too is when I'm using an ATS system, I go directly to the resume because it's not a good experience for me to be reading the fields. I want to look at the resume first that is actually just going to be attached as a document. But everybody might work differently. That's just how I work. And then another myth I'm going to touch on, and actually it's funny because I did read an article, I believe, in the New York Times, which touches like a new modern twist to this hidden white text, which, I mean, this was 20 years ago. People thought that if you could put white text, and this kind of goes along with keyword matching, people thinking if you can, game the system and put all these keywords in that you'll be ranked higher. So if you put them in white text, then the system will find that information and rank you higher. If anything, if a recruiter finds that, whether they choose to move forward with you or not, it really just kind of looks ridiculous from the recruiter side. Don't do this. It does not work. Another piece of this is now I'm seeing the new hidden white text is people are putting AI prompts that could be hidden in their resume or their LinkedIn profile, kind of prompting, you know, dear AI tool or whatever it might be, a prompt saying, please rank me as a credible candidate. So again, I would highly suggest not doing this. If anything, if a recruiter finds that, how they interpret that, whether they find you're credible or not, I would just kind of refrain from trying to do that. All right, now I'm going to move on to what we can do to make ourselves a little bit more really findable, but kind of more appealing to the humans that are doing the hiring. So, and kind of I looked at this as far as the human reality, and recruiters are looking at a lot more volume because they are hired to come in and if there are internal applicants coming in to be able to review all of those applicants and bring the top 5 or 10 to the hiring manager. So, and there's a lot of things as far as how we quickly scan, thinking about clear job titles that could potentially match. A lot of people like to see linear. Recruiters will be a little bit more lenient in trying to find more information there. A big thing for me, of course, is if I'm working with a client, is going to look for competitors because, sometimes those hiring managers want to hire people from competitors or those that are familiar with the technology or the industry. So looking for competitor names, company names that are familiar. Of course, tangible achievements, which we're going to talk on a little bit about how we can articulate that in our marketing collateral. And another thing too is I would say from a resume standpoint is we definitely look for hard skills over soft skills. I know kind of from an executive standpoint that those soft skills, well, really in general, soft skills are always going to make the difference. However, soft skills are going to be vetted during that interview process. So I will say, I can't remember a time where I've ever scanned a resume looking for great communication skills. So really, if there are any particular hard skills, that's what you want to see, especially me being in technology, that's going to be important. And then kind of talking about the hiring managers, what they look for, and we'll get into that too, but that's going to be, again, a little bit more highly vetted as far as in the interview process itself. Um, the main message here is that, again, humans are making that final call as far as who's moving on to each stage. This is not the technology that's doing this. All right. So before I also, and this is my biggest tip, job search tip in general, before we get into all the tactical, writing a resume, writing a LinkedIn profile, really kicking off a job search, is the most important thing is to identify, some people will call it your personal branding, your reputation. Really, it's what you're good at. And I always come back to, there was an Adam Grant podcast, and I can't remember who was on it, but they were talking about personal branding. And a lot of people feel like personal branding is just icky. It doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel authentic. And so I remember there was one quote where they said, when someone tries to create a personal brand, they are manufacturing an impersonal perception. And so I think that that's where it feels a little bit icky, right? Because it's not real and potentially fake. Whether you believe that or not, I think what we can come back to, and when you're thinking about personal branding, is really kind of understanding what makes you valuable. And if you're still struggling with that, the best way to go about that is looking at the actual work that you have, built, or what you've impacted in the past. So the message being, build out a portfolio of meaningful work. And if you have, go back and identify that. That is kind of your North Star towards what your personal branding should be. So thinking about that, and again, this is important because this is going to be what makes you different. This is going to be how you lead with your strengths in your resume, with your writing. It's telling, you might have 100% of your story, but really kind of picking up whatever that potentially, maybe it's a 20 to 40% of that experience, and really building on that and selling that to your audience is what's going to be important. So there are a couple ideas here as far as what you can think about of articulating that, whether that's, the projects that you've built, thinking about those achievements, portfolio pieces, and those contributions. Again, this is going to be specifically in the tech arena of, coding repositories, but thinking about actual pieces that you can showcase if you're more in a management or leadership role, is also thinking about how you've impacted and grown a team. Thinking, and I can get into a little bit about how showing from a leadership standpoint, how you can articulate that. But I've seen anywhere from satisfaction rates of teams, how many people or team members you've been able to promote on to different levels. So there's different ways, even if it might be hard to kind of find quantifiable achievements. There are certain ways that you can articulate that if haven't been in something that's very KPI driven. All right, I'm going to pop over to resume tips real quick, and I'm going to touch on a couple that I see that are often, I guess, overlooked, and things that I feel are important. And I'm actually going to, let me see if I can do this correctly, because I think I did an example of number one. Thinking about soft skills, and again, just skill sections in general. And to me, if I'm looking at a resume and on the front page it says Kelli Hrivnak, recruiter, and then I have a list of 20 skills that could be anything, that are very common in the field, typically it just washes out and really is redundant and doesn't tell me anything. So I know these skills sections probably became popular because people believed of the keyword ranking, and that, people are connecting the dots here. Again, I'm going to look for more context of those skills in the actual experience section. One thing I actually have seen evolve over the past couple of years that I think is more impactful and says a little bit more about you is going to be a key achievement section. And I think it's on my deck here. Okay, perfect. So I want to give an example of what this looks like. And so on the left-hand side here, I have an example of kind of like a skills section, right? Key competencies. And this is actually, that's not an exhaustive list. I've seen, lists of 20 skill sets there. And yeah, that's great, right? It has project management, all these different skill sets. That's fine. Now, a way to upgrade is to, again, think about key achievements. And again, we're thinking about exactly what you might have done that is going to catch my eye. So And I've seen this kind of look a little bit different where some people have done these key achievements under different work experiences as well. You can do this and that too. So maybe tying in what those key achievements, how relevant they are to a job you're applying to. So that could be something that you switch in and out to. There's so much nuance, so it's really hard to give direct information. But again, I find this to be more impactful because, again, those key achievements, that key competency list, I can switch out from the next person to the next. The key achievement, I should not be able to. That grabs my attention and shows, oh, wow, they did something specific. For instance, here was, a sales force and they increased revenue and, increased website performance by this much. That's something that's unique and different. So just something to think about if you're looking to make resume changes and to stand out a little bit. A couple other things that I see missing too, and this is more for my medium to small business size people, is, yes, I know who the Marriott is, or, a big federal government agency, or HubSpot, or Salesforce. Yes, like everybody knows those brands if they're on a resume. If you're working for smaller businesses where, and especially if you're applying to remote roles and some competitors are not going to be familiar with the company you're looking at, I would highly suggest to include just a descriptor if you're putting title, company you worked at, and include a descriptor of maybe company size, revenue, industry, product, or service. So that gives less work for that recruiter to go look up to see, because essentially sometimes people do want to hire based upon the type of company and ability to hit the ground running. So again, something to think about, something that you can quickly insert in there. And then another thing too, especially if you're working as a consultant, is can you add your client names or any particular project details into the experience section? So, I'm going to give an example of somebody working in an advertising agency and supporting a different client. Let's say, um, it could be Procter and Gamble. That's a huge company. Now, if you have NDA issues, I understand you probably can't put those in there, but if you're able to disclose you have no NDA issues and put client names or just descriptions of projects, that's going to be a little bit more substantial as opposed to just a high overarching detail. So something to think about there. And then of course, as we're thinking about how we're writing our metrics here, we have action, scope, metric, outcome, context is really kind of like the STAR format. I obviously see a lot of task-driven resume bullets, but again, it's that results where we really need to see a little bit more. All right, let me move on. All right, doing okay for time here. Skills, I kind of touched on this a little bit. Again, as far as the skills section, shouldn't just be a dump ground for all the things that you've done. One thing that I like to think about is if somebody asks you about that particular skill set, can you talk about it as far as, how you've applied it to be able to kind of share a star story is the way I look at it a little bit. But, think about every single word that you are putting into your resume is important and less is more. Trust me. I don't want to be reading a ton of content if it isn't relevant. And this is, I guess I can touch on this too, because I know that there are sometimes questions as far as the perfect resume length. And listen, I don't care if you have a 3-page resume or a 1-page resume. What needs to be important is what is that information telling me? And is that information important for sharing your credibility, your competence, your strength? Sometimes for more senior level professionals, if some of the experience is dated maybe 15 years or more, depending upon if the industry is relevant or not, you may want to keep that, but I would advise maybe starting to cut some of the experience and bullet sections a little bit, maybe keeping one bullet point as far as what might be important to you. But there is some ways to edit. And so instead of just keep tacking on experience and experience, it's important to kind of go back and see what the back half is telling and if it's important there. Okay, LinkedIn tips. Let me run through this real quickly too. If I have time, I'll actually pull up LinkedIn and kind of I can run through my own profile if it makes sense. Actually, I might do that, but I do want to talk a little bit about LinkedIn. And, for me, I think should LinkedIn be the same as a resume? No. A resume can be tailored although I'm not a big believer in tailoring a resume for every single job. You might have a couple different copies based upon maybe different roles that you're targeting. But thinking getting back to LinkedIn is going to be static. So really it needs to, and this can be tricky if you are targeting a couple different types of roles. So, but it really needs to kind of cover and be specifically attracting, I mean, ideally your one audience, right? So getting to first a headline formula, and I know the algorithm is constantly changing. I wish I could tell you. I mean, it's kind of a little bit crazy right now too, but I will say, from my understanding, is the headline is very important in terms of how you're going to be ranked. Of course, the context as far as what's the content in your entire LinkedIn profile is important as well. So kind of getting back to the headline formula and headline itself, and the headline is important because the headline shows up in all different search queries that you're showing up in. So, even when you're commenting or posting, that is going to say what you are. And again, me with my little recruiter hat on is, and it depends upon your goal right now too. If you are more in a not in a job search, then maybe some of this is not important. However, if you are using LinkedIn with the purpose of having recruiters or just anybody reach out to you and for you to be found for potential roles, then your headline needs to be clear about what your expertise is. So, and again, there could be different opinions here, so this is just my own, but I believe that the strongest way to kind of articulate who you are and what you do, I don't want to say it's the fastest way, but really is starting with your job title. Now, this could, and especially if you are in a role now where your current job title isn't really aligned with your area of expertise or is really vague. I'll see, junior levels who might be working with a PR firm and they have an SVP title, which doesn't really align typically with the market, or if you're a consultant, this is your opportunity to really be able to articulate exactly who you are from a job title perspective. I do like to see maybe industry. Sometimes people will include companies. I also, again, like to see hard skills as opposed to soft skills here, because as I said, I don't know many recruiters who are going to be out using keywords for soft skills specifically. So kind of thinking about what hard skills, your area of expertise, if you're a SME in a particular area, or again, platform or skill set, this would be a good place to put it. And then also the value hook, which again, I do see a lot of people who are using, I help people find, this is a terrible example, help find other people, but really a value hook here. Those are okay, but I would like to see them a little bit at the end because, again, we're thinking with our SEO hat of how people are searching for you with keywords, and nobody's really going to be using those value hooks as far as how they're sourcing, basically. So, load that more at the end. About section, and again, I mean, I'm a little bit in favor of thinking this could almost be your cover letter, which I know is kind of hard because it has to appeal to everybody, but whether you want to share, your top achievements here, sometimes if you are in a career pivot or kind of looking to make a slight change, or your career history isn't necessarily linear, this is a great way to share a little bit about what that journey looks like in case somebody might be looking for an example or just a reason of why you went from this to this. I think it's also very common now that people just don't have a linear career. So this is a great place to kind of include your story if you would like. Along with the about section, there's a featured section, which I think is really great to use if you've been in a podcast, if you've written an article, you can include case studies, you can include your online portfolio. So this is kind of an area to showcase your proof. Be sure to use that. And I think you can toggle what might show up as the first three as well. Don't overlook this if you do have any kind of digital examples that you can place here. And I think there's a couple different formattings that you can use. And one more thinking about, and one is a big one, is location, which I know sounds a little bit kind of weird, but as a lot of companies, and I support tech too, which had been primarily a large industry for remote roles. We're seeing a big return to office. So a lot of recruiters will be using LinkedIn. And actually, I'll show you in the next slide here. But We potentially could be using a zip code radius. So we could put in a zip code of the office and then do a 35-mile radius. So just make sure that your city is set to wherever you are living now. I also would potentially encourage, there are different options to toggle for a metro area, which will give you a larger reach. So for instance, instead of Baltimore, you use the Washington, D.C. metro area. And again, that will hopefully include you in larger radius searches as well. And then again, there's also some skills sections that you can, if you go, there's two areas where you can toggle skills. One is under each work experience, which in tech I love, because if I'm looking for somebody who's used, we'll throw Kubernetes recently, then you are able to kind of showcase from each work experience what tech stack, or again, this could be for any different industries, when you use that to provide context. And also at the bottom of the LinkedIn profile, I want to say there's maybe 50 skill sets that people can go in and actually endorse you for. More importantly, and I actually didn't find this out until about a year ago, you are able to go down there and basically drag and drop the top three. So I would highly suggest, whatever you want to be known for, or maybe what you've been endorsed for the most, is to drag those to the top. So people will see that as your strengths as well. Okay, I think, I'm gonna try, well, I was gonna try and actually toggle over to, let me see if I can do this. Um, I was gonna toggle over to LinkedIn to show you all how to do this, but I don't know if I can do it. All right, I'm gonna keep going here. All right, we're going to go with this. And if I can figure it out, I'll move over to that. But real quickly, so I wanted to kind of give you a behind the scenes. I personally use Sales Navigator. There are obviously a lot of recruiters that use LinkedIn Recruiter, which have very similar fields to, and I know you probably have to like get up to the screen to actually see this, but I did want to give you a peek as far as the fields that recruiters could be using to find you. And so, kind of understanding how recruiters are looking for you might give you some insight as far as what things you might need to change on your own LinkedIn profile. So again, obviously job title is, and which you can see over here, is something that people might choose. And that can be either prior job titles or current job titles. I mean, as a recruiter, I'll think of all the different things and nuances and kind of variants of different job titles and use that to search people. Again, when we're thinking about companies, this could be prior companies you worked at or current companies, is a field that people can use that to search skills, which I think that there is a particular skills section over here. And again, when I was talking about going in and being able to basically load those different skill sets and both the experience as well as just your general, that could be an area they go look. I typically, if I'm doing a skill search, I'm just going to do it in a very generic keyword search so it can pull from any different area within your LinkedIn profile. Industry, I don't rely on this too much because, to be honest, I know probably a lot of you maybe could not be either updating your industry if you are changing, if you're in marketing and you're changing from industry to industry, you just might not have thought to update that. Plus, you know, it might be hard to choose an industry as well because, you might be working for a tech firm doing marketing. So people might be choosing those different industries a little bit differently. Again, keywords, which is, I think it's up here, is my favorite because it will just pull from any piece or really any field within the LinkedIn profile specifically. And then also, again, I touched on the location by zip code. There are a couple other here as well that you might be able to see, but that might give you some insight just as far as how recruiters are using LinkedIn. All right, I'm going to try and I'm going to wrap up here and I'm going to go through a little bit of just AI. And I know like it's exhausting to hear about AI, using AI. Why are people using AI? And I will say, like, I am a huge tech geek. I love testing out all the tools. So I have been, using all different types of AI tools for years and really trying to hone my prompting. I I literally don't care if anybody uses AI for their job search for a multitude of reasons. I will say that there is a great way to use AI and a sloppy way to use AI. If we're talking about, and I do want to talk about from a resume writing perspective, is there are great ways to use AI for resume writing. I think if you are new to using AI, then, and I think this is true, really, my takeaway for anything, if you are using it, is you do need to make sure that you are editing the output and just not copying and pasting and putting into all of your documents because A, it will hallucinate. Specifically, and let me see. Well, so here's a good example, and I recently wrote about this last week, is AI slop. And a lot of what I'm seeing is I see a lot of resumes and the form. Listen, I don't care about the formatting, but this particular example here is something that is very common where it will be keywords first, and then, kind of from an SEO standpoint, and then it will dump a task. So I have seen, some resume summaries like this one in this example, and what the problem is it really is just a bunch of words about marketing that doesn't tell me anything about what you do. I mean, it could have been copied and pasted from a job description. It could be copied and pasted and put from, all different people to people without telling me exactly what you do. So if you're looking at this, you receive that, really, as I said, be able to audit that and say, what is this telling me other than a bunch of tasks? There does need to be specific outcomes attached to that, as opposed to just a bunch of keywords. So thinking about that, and actually, so I'm going to actually pop over to the front two here. I want to talk about using AI as far as specifically being able to analyze your resume and find where maybe you do have very heavy task written experience bullets and you're missing really what you did as far as output and results. AI can help analyze your resume and determine, where you need to think about your outputs. So, and I might hopefully share some of these particular prompts too. I think Robert had said that these might be available. So I know this might be hard to kind of jot down real quickly. I'll start with the resume results finder, which I kind of labeled it. But this is a prompt where, again, you copy and paste your resume into, we'll say, ChatGPT, and you will ask it to analyze your entire resume and really try to find opportunities where you can elaborate on quantifying impact or scope. Um, I probably should add, do not guess at the end of every prompt, because as I said, and I've seen it happen, where AI will just make up a particular metric for you, which can be very problematic if you're in an interview and somebody asks you about that and you have no idea where that number came from, or it's just false. So make sure that you are looking at what that output is. More importantly, as I said, AI can go in and then determine, if you said email, you have something about, let's say, email marketing campaigns, but it didn't include any, you know, click rates or any kind of metric that you can add into that, it should help you there. Another trick that I do like to use is analyzing job descriptions. If you're reading job descriptions and you're having a hard time kind of deciphering what the must-haves or requirements are, I would, again, load up a job description, hoping that it's honestly true, which, fingers crossed, employers are doing their due diligence to make sure that those are true. But load those job descriptions into AI. Then also, if you would like, you can even include your resume to identify maybe where skill gaps are, or maybe where your resume is not speaking to the key requirements of that job description. I will say, if you just are missing those key requirements, now is not the time to make something up. It could potentially mean that maybe it's just not aligned. If you do have that experience and you have not articulated that in your resume, then this will give you an opportunity potentially to rewrite the resume to speak to that job requirement. So again, it's a good way to kind of take a look at job descriptions, and it might even help you moving forward, just be able to manually read job descriptions better. I think I did a couple examples here. So here's a specific one that I did. I don't know if we can see here. So it was a social media manager. and I copied just the requirements into AI and then asked it for a breakdown as far as what could be important here. And again, I mean, you could probably pick that up if you just read it, but it highlighted the particular experience, platform, leadership experience, which would be important to highlight in your resume, as well as, of course, the particular software tools. All right. And again, this is thinking, and I want to move forward as far as, and I know I'm hearing often that people are so frustrated with coming through LinkedIn, applying to jobs, and there's 500 applicants, they're not getting anywhere. And I would say, please do not make this be 100% of your job search strategy. There are other ways to be a little bit more proactive. And I'm going to share just a couple tactics that you can integrate into your, combing through LinkedIn or Indeed or whatever it might be in applying to jobs. The first one I would like to start with is, I love a company target list. So there's a lot of great ways to do this. And again, if I can toggle over to LinkedIn, I want to show you a quick example on the free LinkedIn version as well. But again, thinking how we can use AI here is, and I would say use them all model wise. I mean, Perplexity, I know that there's some that are better than others as far as research models, and just test them all. But I would encourage you to start thinking about companies and even within proximity that, whether it's due to value, mission, maybe you are looking to kind of stay in healthcare, you like nonprofit, you want a small business, you have experience in manufacturing. Be able to identify those companies. And LinkedIn is a great research tool where you can really start basically identifying any particular hiring leaders within those organizations and just being very targeted and concise about the companies that you're targeting and keeping an eye on, any jobs that they're posting. I mean, you can set job alerts, which I believe you can do through LinkedIn, but I would encourage everybody to keep an eye on all businesses' job opening page as well, especially for small businesses who don't want to pay for the LinkedIn ads specifically. So, and again, here's a prompt that you can use where AI might be able to build out that list for you, depending upon, find me 25 companies within a 30-mile radius of where I live. This is what I'm looking for. And as I said, it will be able to aggregate a list for you. Again, LinkedIn, I want to touch on that. I'm going to come back to the reverse engineer LinkedIn searches. And again, this is kind of leading into that, targeted company approach is then starting to map out your network. So this is kind of a Lucy 552 strategy, which it doesn't have to be this, but it is something that you start with, and you can certainly kind of iterate and change that. But again, if you find a target company, if you're identifying 5 contacts within that organization, maybe if you're working in sales, you can find, 3 BDRs, the director of sales, and just start making a list of people who might be good to contact and start networking and kind of keep on your radar. And really, yes, it's great if you're using LinkedIn and if they're active on LinkedIn, sure, comment on what they're posting. Some people just aren't active on LinkedIn. So, I mean, another way is maybe keeping an eye on if the company is hosting any events? Are they going to any local conferences? Are they doing any virtual events? I mean, I am a huge advocate of being able to, and I know time is precious and we all don't have time to be hitting networking events up every week, but if you can at least allocate some time to get in front of people on, and have some real life interaction, there's something to be said there. So kind of keep your eye on what those 5 people are potentially doing, make some action items. Again, I had said engage on 5 posts. If there's somebody that's active, again, that is great advice as well. And direct messaging. So I do want to touch on direct messaging too, because I get 500 direct messages. And listen, I try and keep up with my inbox. It is buried probably within hours, especially on LinkedIn. So I will say brevity is everything with all things outreach based. So be very concise in terms of what your outreach is. And also, I mean, there's always how can I add value? And really, maybe it's not just, hey, do you have any job openings? This is what I'm looking for, which is great for weak ties. I think that you have to feel every situation out, but also can you just have a industry, question, or maybe the company is growing, or they had published a recent blog article, or maybe they had won a new award or won new business, or anything that you can do to kind of just initiate a real conversation is going to start kind of building those relationships. And unfortunately, sometimes with networking is not a transactional convert immediately. A lot of this is going to take time. For everybody who is not in a job search right now, I would encourage you to really set a weekly cadence of making sure that you are reaching out to your network. I'm a big component of time blocking, which I'll get into, but if it's on a Thursday from 2 to 2:30, make this a habit, regardless if you're job searching or not, on a week-to-week basis. Right. Now I want to get close to Q&A here. So kind of to add on to this, and I will kind of switch over to Q&A here. But again, as I had mentioned, just make it a daily momentum if you can. I know that it might take a lot as far as kind of reaching out and networking, but really my biggest takeaway is that we should be doing this on a day-to-day basis, even if it's just one person. Pick up the phone, video call, whatever it might be. Just being able to kind of continue to cultivate those relationships is important. I did want to talk about, when I was talking about creating a target company list, use a spreadsheet. So I know that I believe Teal, which I linked here, which I probably should drop in the chat, which I will do that. Teal has a job tracker where you can actually go in, and it's very nicely done, but you can put in the company and then also include the contacts and just actually include maybe what job you applied to if you're specifically tracking jobs as well. I would also encourage you maybe to copy and paste the job, because if they close the job and you go to the link and it's closed, that can sometimes be a problem. So if you're able to, and I've heard people do this differently as far as just emailing, copy paste an email so then they can go back and find it. But I would think about just making sure you copy and paste that if you are called back so you can find it. But use a tracker. You can even use, Excel, Google, make your own, but it does help keep you accountable for your activity. And it really gives you a plan. I mean, I know there's probably many days people wake up and they do not want to do anything job search related. And listen, I am the worst with planning myself as a recruiter. I've been told to plan for 17 years and still I've not gotten my life together for that. But I will say there's something to be said about when you do it, you wake up, you have a spreadsheet of the companies, the people who you're going to outreach, what that activity is, will really just help put you in a motion to move and get it done. So, all right, I think all right, I have 9 minutes plus, so I tried to speed it up here. And again, just thinking again, really don't be optimizing for the machine, because as I said, I have a huge network of recruiters and I don't know any recruiters who are trusting any software system to actually choose the right applicants and candidates to move forward. The humans, granted, if there are chatbots, but humans are conducting those interviews and they are moving people forward to real interviews. So again, optimize for the human, be very clear and concise about what your value prop is. And I will open up to questions.
So, folks, let's give Kelli a big virtual round of applause for a great talk. And we have 10 minutes for questions. We have 117 people on the line, Kelli, so that's great. I'm going to jump to the Q&A box, and I'm going to focus there first. Lisa asks, can recruiters see how long someone has had open to work, the open to work indicator on their LinkedIn profile?
So I do not use LinkedIn Recruiter. I don't know if anybody in the chat here is a recruiter who has used that, can speak on that. I will say that I cannot see that using Sales Navigator. So I can't speak to that.
Dawn says, how many target companies do you recommend be on a job seeker's hit list?
So some people say 20, some people say 50. I mean, I personally have done this for my own BD and have 25, which I think is a good start. I mean, chip away at it. Don't go crazy. I think with all of this, right, is if you can just do one, take away one small action item today. I mean, it's a lot of information. It can be very overwhelming. So I would say start with 10, build it to 20, build it to 30. And really, again, when we're building target companies, and listen, people get hired at the Salesforces and the REIs of the world, but diversify your list to include small businesses, because small businesses are really, doing a lot of hiring as well beyond just the large enterprise companies. So I would encourage you to, if you're open to remote, or I'm sorry, if you're open to going into an office, I would highly encourage you to look at maybe, some unknowns that might be in your backyard. And actually, I was going to do this. Let me see. Bear with me here. I was going to show you how to do that real quickly, but we'll keep rolling through questions and
Mhm.
I do want to drop. Okay, people were asking. There's the
And
job.
Kelly, by the way,
Oh,
we just see you. We don't see your screen. So if you're going to show us something on your screen, we won't be able to see it at the moment.
okay.
So Jennifer asks, the last title I had before my layoff was DEI consultant, but I was principally an internal communications professional slash writer, and that is what I'm looking for now. I also worry against bias towards DEI.
Mhm.
Should I change my title to something that is more descriptive of what I did?
I would first check to make sure that your company doesn't have any policy of you changing that job title. I do know some big tech enterprise level organizations, they do have policies with that. I don't know what the repercussions are, but I do know that there is some policy there. If there is no policy, then I guess I would say I would be okay with maybe changing that job title. I would also encourage, and again, kind of getting back to the LinkedIn, is this is a great place to rebrand yourself in the headliner. You can also just brand yourself on your resume as far as if it's internal comms. And, I mean, I don't want to say that there's bias, but of course, there's bias all over the place for all different reasons. So if you feel, and sometimes I say A/B test it, which I know can be weird because people have different reactions. So I would say maybe if you are comfortable, and again, if there isn't going to be any particular policy issues, I would say go ahead and kind of use your summary and your resume as far as internal comms, include what you've done, and really kind of lean into that. And hopefully, if you are required to use DEI consultant, hopefully the rest of the resume is speaking to your internal comms and experience.
Nicole asks, regarding portfolios, as a QA analyst, when I'm working, I produce test plans, test strategies, metrics, bug reports, etc. But I've always had to leave them behind when I leave a company.
Yeah.
So how do I build a shareable portfolio?
Ooh, with QA testing. So it's interesting because I just helped somebody with a very similar search, and they were asked to scrub it, which I think was difficult too. So I know that can be hard. So either if you can find maybe, I don't know if you even want to build out a freelance project where you can showcase that yourself, whether it's with, a client who needs work or if it's just a personal project to showcase that. Otherwise, I do think that a lot of companies, especially on the technical side, and if you're open to it, of course, are just going to be running you through technical assessments. So be open to that if, of course, you don't have something to show. I'd be curious to see if you are kind of facing some challenges because you don't have that work available. But I mean, I bump into all the time just for NDA reasons. They just cannot show that work, which is why the technical assessments do come in place.
Keith says, you mentioned using a spreadsheet to track job applications and targets. What follow up action items should be on a spreadsheet after you apply to a job, particularly if you don't have contacts at the company and don't know the identity of the hiring manager?
Yeah, that's a tough one because, and this might be an unpopular opinion here, but, and I do see, listen, it's not going to hurt if and it depends upon the company, right? Because maybe a small business, they don't even have an internal recruiting team and a hiring manager might be doing the vetting. So it's hard to maybe sometimes figure out who is doing the hiring. If it is a larger company and they do have internal recruiters, Hunter.io is a great tool to scrape email for a business where you can kind of kind of guess. If it comes back, then try again. I mean, LinkedIn is fine too, but I would maybe suggest just following up with the recruiter, the internal recruiter. I applied to this job, include the URL, and it's not, can I get a coffee chat? Trust me, if you look like you are qualified, again, the recruiter's objective is to get people hired for their roles. So if they believe you are, and listen, it doesn't have to be 100%. I call people who I'm kind of on the fence about. That's the purpose of an interview screen, is to kind of figure out if there is a fit. So if your resume shows there is enough information there where I want to find out if you could be a fit, then that follow up, maybe just to get them, you're putting them on the radar again, and you're making less work for the recruiter by including your resume and including the URL if it is a large company helps. Otherwise, it's hard. I would say, keep your eyes on other job opportunities that might open up. And again, just kind of keep your eyes on any movement within the organization. If that position wasn't right, as you're gaining more experience yourself, your resume might change. So if a different position comes up, you've updated your resume and there is an opportunity for you to reapply with new experience.
A lot of folks in the chat, and we have a question in the Q&A as well, concerns about AI interviews. And if you're a hiring manager and your company uses AI interviews and the applicant wants to opt out of an AI interview, wants to not accept it and have an in-person, which or a an interview with a person,
Mhm.
as the hiring manager, how would you feel about that?
I mean, I think it's going to come down to the policy of the organization, right? So if they have a stage or a step in their process where it is a chat bot, either, and again, like I haven't worked with companies where they've really, I mean, if they give you an option, go for it, go for the in-person. But otherwise, if they feel, and it could be for consistency reasons, right? Like if they're putting that particular step in as an AI interview, then that's going to be for the entire funnel. So I would find it very unusual for them to make an exception on a case-to-case basis. I think you're going to have to determine, is this a company I want to work for? Is this something I want to move forward in the process? So, again, I would find it very unusual and even questionable if they're giving people options there, unless that is very specifically outlined from the start.
As we hit 10:30, a final question will go to Anita, who says, overall, how would you describe the strength of the current job market?
That's a very, like, it depends on, like nurses, RNs, they're crushing it right now. So I think it depends upon what your specialty is and what your industry is. I mean, I'm currently in DC where people are furloughed, and the federal government a lot of people are out of work right now. People who maybe supported USAID and international development, their skill set is so niche in terms of being able to transfer over to a different organization as opposed to maybe a QA tester that worked for USAID, where that skill set could be a little bit more transferable by industry. So it depends, I think. And I would say, my big tips and takeaways are, pay attention to the industries of growth. If you are open to going into an office, look at some hidden gems that might be within a 30-mile radius. Um, Listen, I've worked remote for 10 years, so who am I to say, yes, you need to be open to going into an office. However, if that's the majority of the roles, you might have to kind of figure out what's going to make sense for you. And again, small business advocate here. So look for maybe some smaller businesses that aren't the big company names that everybody else is going after, especially, the remote roles are getting slammed right now. So, I mean, people are getting hired for those remote roles, but also, go for maybe some smaller organizations, especially if they are in office. They have to hire within a smaller radius. So you could potentially have a higher chance of being hired.
So, folks, let's give Kelli one last big virtual round of applause for a great presentation. We took nearly 10 questions, so that's great. Folks, look for an email from me later today with a link to the recording, information about some other upcoming virtual programs for job seekers. I will follow up with Kelli regarding the prompts that she shared and the slide deck in general, and I'll figure out what I can and cannot share. Kelli, do you have any closing comments for the audience?
Well, thank everybody. Thank you for coming and listening to me like ramble on for an hour. I really appreciate it. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn because I know I didn't cover everything and I did want to show the LinkedIn thing and I just didn't get around to it. So I'll try and loom that and share that to everybody just because it's a good tip. So other than that, thank you for spending your morning with me. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks so much, Kelly. And folks, make sure to take the feedback survey when you exit the Zoom. So thank
Okay.
you all so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.